King Charles has reportedly refused to approve HRH titles on official passports for Archie and Lilibet, triggering a quiet but serious constitutional dispute behind palace walls. Sources suggest this decision challenges long-standing royal protocol and raises questions about authority, identity, and succession. While the Sussex camp pushes back, insiders warn the situation could escalate fast. This is not just about titles anymore, it may reshape royal power itself. Watch closely as this story unfolds. What happens next could change everything forever. The moment did not happen in public. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no official statement. Instead, sources suggest it began quietly, behind palace doors, where decisions are often made far from public view. And yet, this one would not stay hidden for long. Reports indicate that King Charles made a firm and unexpected choice, one that directly affected the official status of Archie and Lilibet. The issue was not about appearances or public roles. It centered on something far more technical, yet deeply symbolic: the use of HRH titles on official passports. At first glance, it may have seemed like a small administrative detail. But insiders believe it carried much deeper meaning. Traditionally, royal children are granted titles that reflect their position within the monarchy. These titles are not just ceremonial. They signal identity, hierarchy, and recognition within an institution built on centuries of protocol. And in many cases, these titles appear in official documentation, reinforcing their place in the royal structure. But this time, something changed. Sources suggest that approval for including HRH titles on the children's passports was withheld. No public explanation followed. No immediate clarification was given. And that silence only added to the tension. Because this was not just about paperwork. Insiders believe the decision may have been part of a broader internal discussion, one focused on redefining what it means to be royal in a modern world. Reports indicate that advisors close to the palace had been reviewing how titles are used, especially for those no longer carrying out official duties. And this is where things took a turn. Because Archie and Lilibet, while born into the royal family, are not part of the working monarchy. Their parents stepped away from official roles years earlier. Since then, questions have remained about how their children would be formally recognized within the system. For a long time, those questions stayed unanswered. But now, this decision appears to offer a clear, if controversial, direction. Some insiders suggest that the move reflects a growing effort to create a sharper line between working royals and those outside official duties. Others believe it may be tied to concerns about public perception, especially as debates continue about the monarchy's role in modern society. Still, not everyone sees it that way. Because what happened next raised even more questions. If the monarch has the authority to grant or withhold titles, does that authority extend to how those titles are used on state documents? And if passports are issued under government oversight, where does royal tradition end, and legal structure begin? These are not simple questions. And sources suggest that even within the palace, there may not be full agreement. Some reports indicate that advisors spent months discussing the implications before any decision was made. Legal experts were reportedly consulted. Historical precedents were reviewed. And yet, despite all that preparation, the outcome has still sparked uncertainty. Because this decision does not exist in isolation. It touches on identity. It touches on power. And it touches on the future direction of the monarchy itself. Stay with us, because this is only the beginning. As news of the decision began to circulate, reactions did not remain confined to private discussions. Slowly, details started to emerge. Questions began to surface. And attention started to grow. Insiders believe that what was meant to be a controlled internal decision has now taken on a life of its own. And this is where the tension begins to build. Because for the Sussex camp, this issue is not just symbolic. Reports suggest it may be seen as a matter of recognition, of status, of identity, and of how their children are positioned within the royal family. At the same time, palace insiders reportedly view the situation through a different lens, one focused on structure, clarity, and the long-term stability of the institution. Two perspectives, one decision, and a growing divide between them. But that's only part of the story. Because behind the scenes, something even more complex may be unfolding. Sources suggest that this moment could mark the start of a much larger shift, one that goes beyond titles and documents. A shift that may redefine how royal authority is exercised in the modern era. And if that's true, then this is not just a family matter. It becomes something else entirely. A constitutional question. A structural challenge. A moment that could set a precedent for years to come. Keep watching, because the next chapter reveals how this single decision may have deepened an already fragile relationship, turning quiet tension into something far more serious. And once that line is crossed, it is not easy to return. What began as a quiet administrative decision did not stay contained for long. Instead, it appears to have opened a deeper divide, one that had already been forming beneath the surface for years. Sources suggest that communication between King Charles and the Sussex household has remained limited and at times strained. While there has been no official confirmation of direct conflict over this specific issue, insiders believe the passport decision may have intensified existing tensions. Because this is not happening in isolation. Reports indicate that since stepping away from royal duties, the Sussex family has operated under a different understanding of their role within the monarchy. While no longer active members of the working royal structure, they still remain part of the royal family by birth and lineage. And for them, insiders suggest, this distinction matters deeply, especially when it comes to their children. From their perspective, this issue may go beyond titles on a document. It may reflect something more personal. Recognition. Fairness. Identity. Sources suggest that for Archie and Lilibet, the question is not just what they are called, but how they are acknowledged within the system they were born into. And according to some reports, there may be concern that limiting the use of HRH titles could signal a gradual distancing from that identity. But the palace, insiders say, may see it differently. Because from within the institution, there appears to be a growing focus on clarity. Reports indicate that advisors have been working toward defining a more streamlined monarchy, one where roles, responsibilities, and privileges are more clearly separated. And this is where things become complicated. Because in that model, titles are not just inherited, they are tied to function, to duty, to public service. Insiders believe that maintaining this distinction has become a priority, especially as the monarchy faces increasing scrutiny from the public. In a time when every decision is closely watched, the line between symbolic status and active responsibility may matter more than ever. But that creates a difficult balance. Because while the institution seeks structure, the individuals involved are still family. And that's where the emotional weight begins to surface. Reports suggest that decisions like this, though framed as policy, can carry deeply personal consequences. For parents, especially, questions about their children's identity and future can feel far from procedural. And this is where the situation starts to shift. Because what may have been intended as a strategic decision is now being interpreted in multiple ways. Some observers suggest it reflects a broader effort to modernize the monarchy. Others believe it may be influenced by past disagreements that have yet to fully resolve. But no one seems to agree on one clear explanation. And that uncertainty is adding to the tension. Because without clear communication, even small decisions can take on larger meaning. Stay with us, because the next detail makes this even more complex. As reactions quietly build, insiders believe that both sides are holding firm. There is no sign of immediate compromise. No indication that positions are softening. And that raises a critical question. If neither side is willing to adjust, what happens next? Because this is not just a disagreement over titles. It is a clash of perspectives. A difference in how the monarchy should function, and how family ties should be honored within it. And once those differences become public, even indirectly, they are difficult to contain. But that's only part of the story. Because behind the emotional and personal layers, there may be something even more significant at stake. Sources suggest that this situation could begin to touch on areas beyond family dynamics, areas that involve rules, authority, and the limits of royal power itself. And this is where things take a more serious turn. Because if this issue continues to grow, it may move beyond private disagreement and enter a space where tradition and law begin to intersect. Keep watching, because the next chapter explores a critical question no one seems able to answer clearly. Who actually has the final authority in a situation like this? And what happens when that authority is no longer universally agreed upon? As the divide quietly deepens, attention begins to shift away from family tension and toward something far more complex. Because behind the emotional weight of this situation lies a question that few expected to confront. Where does royal authority actually end? Sources suggest that the issue of HRH titles on passports may have entered what experts describe as a constitutional gray zone. At first, the matter seemed straightforward. The monarch, by tradition, holds the power to grant or restrict royal titles. That authority has existed for generations, shaping the structure of the monarchy as it is known today. But this situation is different, because passports are not simply personal documents. They are issued under state authority. They represent legal identity, not just symbolic status. And that distinction is now raising serious questions. Reports indicate that legal advisors may have begun reviewing whether the use of royal titles on such documents falls purely under royal discretion, or whether it intersects with government oversight. If a passport is considered an official state document, then who ultimately decides what appears on it? And this is where things take a turn. Because there is no simple, widely agreed answer. Some insiders believe that tradition still holds the strongest influence. Under this view, the monarch's decision would be final, even in matters involving documentation. But others suggest that in a modern constitutional system, certain limits may apply, especially when state processes are involved. That difference in interpretation has created uncertainty. And uncertainty, in situations like this, can quickly become a problem. Because if the boundaries of authority are unclear, then every decision risks being questioned. Every action risks being challenged. And what begins as a symbolic issue can evolve into something far more serious. But that's only part of the story. Because this is not just about legal theory, it has practical consequences. Sources suggest that if disagreements over documentation continue, it could potentially involve government departments responsible for issuing passports. While there is no indication that such involvement has formally occurred, insiders believe the possibility alone is enough to raise concern. Because once external bodies become part of the process, the situation changes entirely. It is no longer confined to the royal household. It becomes a matter of public administration, of constitutional clarity, of institutional boundaries. And this is where the stakes begin to rise. Reports indicate that those who closely monitor the stability of the monarchy are watching carefully. Even a small shift in how authority is understood could have lasting effects. If a precedent is set here, it may influence how similar issues are handled in the future. And that raises another critical question. Could this moment force a clearer definition of royal power in the modern era? Because for decades, much of the monarchy's function has relied on tradition rather than written rules. That flexibility has allowed it to adapt over time. But it has also created areas where interpretation can vary. This may be one of those moments. Stay with us, because the implications go even further. If the current situation leads to formal clarification, whether through internal agreement or external guidance, it could reshape how decisions are made moving forward. Not just in this case, but across the institution as a whole. And that possibility is not being ignored. Insiders suggest that behind the scenes, discussions may already be taking place about how to manage the situation without escalating it further. Because once constitutional questions become public, they are difficult to contain. But what happens if those discussions fail? What happens if no clear resolution is reached? Because that is where the real risk begins. A prolonged gray zone creates instability. And instability invites scrutiny. And in today's world, scrutiny does not stay quiet for long. Keep watching, because the next chapter reveals how this situation is already moving beyond palace walls, drawing global attention and shaping public perception in ways no one can fully control. And once public opinion enters the picture, everything changes. What was once a quiet internal matter is no longer contained. Now, it is being watched, closely, publicly, and across the world. As reports about the passport decision began to surface, reactions did not take long to follow. Media outlets picked up the story. Analysts started asking questions. And soon, what had been discussed behind palace doors became part of a much larger global conversation. Sources suggest that public opinion is already forming, and it appears deeply divided. On one side, some observers believe the decision reflects a necessary shift. Reports indicate that there has been growing pressure on the monarchy to modernize, to reduce privileges that may no longer align with public expectations. From this perspective, limiting the use of HRH titles could be seen as a step toward a more streamlined and accountable institution. But others strongly disagree. Because for many, this situation is not about reform, it is about fairness. Insiders suggest that critics view the decision as unnecessarily strict, especially when it involves children who were born into the royal family. Reports indicate that questions are being raised about whether such actions risk appearing personal rather than procedural. And this is where things begin to intensify. Because once public emotion becomes part of the narrative, the situation becomes far more difficult to manage. But that's only part of the story. The global nature of the discussion is adding another layer of complexity. Sources suggest that international media coverage has amplified the issue, bringing in voices from outside the United Kingdom. Different perspectives, different expectations, and different cultural views on monarchy are now shaping how the story is being understood. And that matters. Because the royal family's image has never been confined to one country. It exists on a global stage. And every decision, no matter how technical, can influence how that image is perceived worldwide. Reports indicate that this growing attention may be increasing pressure on both sides. The Sussex camp, already under constant public focus, may feel the weight of global scrutiny. At the same time, the palace must consider how its actions are interpreted not just domestically, but internationally. And this is where things take another turn. Because perception is not just about opinion, it can affect stability. Insiders believe that the monarchy has become increasingly aware of how public sentiment shapes its long-term future. Trust, support, and relevance are all influenced by how decisions are viewed. And in a situation like this, where interpretations vary widely, maintaining that balance becomes a challenge. Stay with us, because the next part changes everything. As discussions continue, some reports suggest that neither side is rushing to respond publicly. The silence, while strategic, may also be contributing to speculation. Without clear statements, narratives begin to form on their own. And those narratives do not always align with intention. This creates a risk. Because once a story is shaped by public interpretation, it becomes harder to redirect. And that leads to a critical question. Will public pressure eventually influence the outcome? Because history has shown that the monarchy does respond, carefully but deliberately, to shifts in public mood. Decisions are not made in isolation. They exist within a broader environment of expectation and accountability. But what if this time is different? What if the palace chooses to stand firm, regardless of criticism? That possibility is now being closely watched. Because if the decision remains unchanged, it may signal a new approach, one where maintaining internal structure takes priority over external reaction. And that could mark a significant shift. But the story does not end here. Because behind the scenes, something even more important may be unfolding. Sources suggest that quiet discussions are continuing, conversations that could determine whether this situation escalates further or begins to resolve. Keep watching, because the final chapter reveals what may happen next behind palace doors. And whether this conflict will quietly fade, or turn into something far more lasting. As global attention continues to grow, the most important developments may still be happening out of sight. Behind closed doors, sources suggest that discussions are ongoing, careful, controlled, and highly sensitive. Because at this stage, every move matters. Reports indicate that both sides are aware of the stakes. This is no longer just a disagreement over titles or documentation. It has evolved into a situation that could shape future decisions within the monarchy itself. And according to insiders, that awareness is influencing how each step is being taken. But there is one key detail. No one appears willing to act too quickly. Sources suggest that within the palace, advisors may be working to find a solution that avoids escalation. A public confrontation would carry risks, both for the institution and for the individuals involved. And so, any response is likely being carefully measured. At the same time, reports indicate that the Sussex side may also be considering its options. Insiders believe that maintaining a clear position is important, especially when the issue involves their children's identity and future recognition. And this is where things become even more delicate. Because when both sides hold firm, the space for compromise becomes smaller. But that's only part of the story. Some observers suggest that a middle ground could still emerge. This might involve a limited or conditional use of titles, something that allows both sides to maintain their positions without fully conceding. However, sources indicate that such solutions are not always easy to implement, especially within a system built on tradition. And tradition does not change quickly. Reports suggest that timing may now play a crucial role. Upcoming royal events, official engagements, or even behind-the-scenes meetings could influence how and when this situation is addressed. Insiders believe that any resolution, if it comes, may be tied to a moment where it can be introduced with minimal disruption. But what if that moment never arrives? Because the longer this issue remains unresolved, the more pressure may build. Public attention may increase. Speculation may grow. And positions may become harder to shift. Stay with us, because the next detail is critical. If no agreement is reached, this situation could enter a prolonged phase, one where silence replaces action and uncertainty becomes the norm. While this may prevent immediate conflict, it does not remove the underlying tension. In fact, it may deepen it. Because unresolved issues tend to resurface, often at unexpected times. And that raises a serious possibility. Could this moment be the beginning of a larger shift within the monarchy? Sources suggest that some insiders are quietly considering that outcome, not because of the decision itself, but because of what it represents. A change in how authority is exercised, a shift in how roles are defined, and a new approach to balancing tradition with modern expectations. If that is true, then this situation may be remembered as more than just a dispute. It may be seen as a turning point. But that depends on what happens next. Because even now, the final outcome remains uncertain. Negotiations may succeed. Positions may soften. Or the divide may continue, shaping future interactions in ways that are not yet fully visible. And this is where the story leaves us. Not with a clear resolution, but with a question. A question that may define the future of this institution. Will this conflict quietly resolve behind palace walls? Or is it the start of something much bigger that cannot be contained? What do you think happens next? And as this story continues to unfold, one question hangs over the monarchy like never before. Will tradition hold, or are we witnessing the start of a new era of change? Keep watching closely, because the next development, quiet or public, could redefine royal authority forever. What do you think will happen next, and how will it shape the future of the royal family? The answers may surprise everyone.